As soon as you said it's about the ferry, this was the one that stuck in my head. So, the son of a sailor went out to sea for adventure, spending the view of the captain and crew, just like a man released from indenture. As a dreamer of dreams, a traveling man, I've journeyed many a mile, with dozens of books about heroes and crooks, and I've learned from both of their styles. The son of a son, the son of a son, the son of a son of a sailor, the son of a gun, below the last ton, one step ahead of the jailer. No way in the future, southeast of disorder, shaking the hand of a mango man as he greets you at the border. And the lady she hails from Trinidad, island of spices, salt for your meat, cinnamon sweet, and rum for all your good vices. Now when it all ends, I can fathom my friends. I knew I might toss out my anchor, cruising along, searching for songs, not a lawyer, a thief, or a banker, but a son of a son, the son of a son, the son of a son of a sailor, the son of a gun, though the last ton, one step ahead of the jailer. I'm just a son of a son, the son of a son, the son of a son of a sailor. The seas in my veins, my tradition remains. I'm just glad I don't live in a trailer.
All right.
Thank you. A lot of easy songs about boats. I could have done the wreck of the Evan Fitzgerald, but that one takes forever, and it's really hard to sing. It's a little bit long. So here's actually one of my.
That's a bad subject for this start.
I know. Also, it's a heavy song, but this is a song about a boat. That was it went all over the world and helped people learn about sea life and marine biology and things like that, and helped create a better life for the planet. And so there was a song written about that boat. You probably know it.
Clear ocean, to ride on the crest of a wild raging storm, to work in the service of life and the living, in search of the answers to questions unknown, to be part of the movement and part of the growing, part of beginning to understand. Beside you to light up the darkness and show us the way. For though we are strangers in your silent world, to live on the land we must learn from the sea. To be true as the tide and free as the wind swell, joyful and loving in letting it be. Calypso, the places you've been to, the things that you've shown us, the stories you tell. Calypso, I sing to your spirit, the man who has served you so long.
Betty Lou, I'm going to start with you. And the reason I'm going to start with you because everybody was given an assignment, and no doubt everybody complied, to listen to a presentation we had here in 2009 by Art Thomas. And Art Thomas gave a great shout out to John and Betty Lou Cheney. And you want to talk a little bit about how John got involved and you got involved with the Stow Ferry? We know John was, and both of you were involved in a lot of things, but why that?
John was involved long before I was. He was involved in the ferry back when the county was running it. And I can't tell you how because my memory's not that good. But anyway, but when the board decided that they would scuttle the sale of the Bell for scrap and reorganized and decided that they would take over that job, and the ferry was part of it. That's when I got involved. And ever since then, it's been part of the things that I have done too.
Like, for instance, what have you been involved in? You gave me a wonderful little biographical piece, but I thought you best if you
I can
tell.
remember all those things. Well, I was a cleaner, a scraper, a painter. Mainly my job, as I see it, I was the stats keeper and the history teller. We had kids come on from schools all around the county, and it was mostly my job to tell them the history of the ferry, starting in 1811.
Well, talk a little bit about that, because I'm not sure everybody here, they certainly know of the ferry, but they don't know that in 1811, Thomas Bemus and that whole story. Do you want to give us sort of a Reader's Digest of it?
I'll give you part of it. It's hard to do a Reader's Digest of 200 years, 209 years. But the very first thing that when the county was formed, the very first thing that the legislature did was to give a license to the Bemus family for running a ferry across the lake. And that was in 1811. And from then on, all kinds of ferries. The first ones, I presume, were log rafts going back and forth. And from there, increased size, increased capacity, increased availability, increased motor sizes and all that sort of thing, to 1929, when the one that we have now, are using now, was the one that was used. And
Is one of the people who were really instrumental in running it for a significant period of time was a guy named Alton Ball.
yes,
Can you talk a little bit about him?
I wish I could. I don't know very much about him, except that was his main purpose in life, I think, was to keep the ferry going back and forth, because there were people on both sides of the lake who needed things from the other side of the lake, and the only way to do that was either to go across the ferry or go all the way around. And way back in 1811, it took a long time to go all the way around the end of the lake. It's approximately 23 miles, I think it was, they figured.
One of the things I learned in listening to Art's presentation, which ultimately led to the first book on A Fairy's Tale. A Fairy Tale?
A fairy tale.
Fairy Tale. Was in fact, at one point there were five ferries at one point. Lakewood, Greenhurst, and even two in Bemus Point.
There were two one year in Bemus Point going back and forth, yes.
Were they, and then at some point the Alton Ball, when he passed away, it ultimately became part of the county road system.
Yes, it did.
And that continued for a while, didn't it?
Yes, I can't tell you how long, but for quite a while. And because it was part of the road system, it had to be upgraded so it would be able to hold all the big trucks and things that went back and forth. So that was another upgrade on the ferry. Mm-hmm.
So, Chris, you're in the process of, this is Chris Flanders, and you're in the process of writing the second book, an upgrade of Art's book, I should say Art's book, but upgrade of the book on the ferry. And Could you pick up a little bit on the history here of, at some point, how the county even got into the business, let alone got out of it?
Well, Alton Ball had the ferry for 40 years, you know, approximately 1900 to 1940. And when he died, his son ran it, I think, for about a year afterwards. And then it was World War II. And it was said that his son wanted to get one of the really good wartime jobs down in Erie, Pennsylvania. So the ferry sank, and he walked away. So the county bought it, I think for $15,000, something like that. It wasn't a great amount of money.
That's why we didn't do the song, the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, there's been some sinkings here, yeah. So the county picked it up, they ran it, they bailed it out and ran it for the first year. The second year, they put another section in the middle of the bottom of the hull, and it did some upgrades in engine and widened it. They stuck the engine off one side so they could get 9 cars on. And so they did it, but then they ran it. I raised horses for a while, and they ran it hard and wet and put it away wet. And it didn't get a lot of maintenance. It just got used hard because it was every day, 7 days a week, sun up to sundown to midnight usually. So it was very tough to have the ferry used that much. So the next little part of the ferry, one of the first part of the ferries maybe that we didn't talk about, or we started to talk about, was how they got it across in the beginning. When it was just a log raft, they would try to pole it. When they did some soundings there to put a bridge across the Narrows in the lake, it turns out there's 150 feet of mud. I mean, there's no bottom. And so they couldn't pole because they'd lose their poles. And so they would paddle it or do whatever they could. And they eventually strung a manila rope across the Narrows there and hand over hand pulled it back and forth. And in a little bit they put a crank on it. And then, so everybody that rode the ferry had to crank some. You know, it got to be kind of a social thing. There was a well-known, I don't have his name, but a young man that used to run the ferry. And he would get all of his young women and men friends to come out, and it was sort of a courting type thing. Everybody, you know, ran the ferry together, and it was a party, and it was a great thing. So before they even had engines, they were going back and forth the best they could. It still was hard when it was windy. It was still hard when it was bad weather. So the addition of engines, as they got them, they had steam engine, they had a naphtha-fired steam engine. Then they went to a gasoline-powered engine. We've got a lovely Cummins diesel now that was donated to us that we're using. That's sturdy and trustworthy, and so far so good, right?
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of hard work that the ferry's done, and it's still incredible that it's still running on that same hull, you know, at this time even. So
With the county ran it, that of course, whether it ran at a positive or a negative, it was just part of the tax base. And so therefore, when the bridge, I assume, had a detrimental impact because...
Well, you would have assumed that was the end of it. They'd scrap the ferry, and that was and people rose up from all over that had ridden the ferry, or their father had driven the ferry, or their grandfather had driven the ferry, or they were related to the Bemuses, or something. All these people rose up and said, no, she's not going to be scrapped. And we've had just a little bit of that just now, when she had to have so much repair done to her. It's amazing the amount of people that have had stories to tell about being on the ferry and wanting it to still be there. It's a neat thing. It's really quite surprising.
So the county, because the highway system clearly is now the bridge, and now the completed bridge in 1982.
82, yeah.
And so they decide to sell it, and they sell it to whom?
Well, Chautauqua, what was it called? Historic Vessels.
Historic vessel.
Historic Vessels bought it, or leased it from the county for $1 a year. And part of the lease was that they had to run it They couldn't just hold on to it. They had to run it at a profit. They didn't want anybody losing money at it. They also had to run it on a schedule that was published in every, so there was a lot to picking this thing up. It wasn't just a joyride or a historic vessel to play with. It was hard work for the people that took it over, and it was hard. It was very hard to keep it going. It's like anything you've got. If you have an older car and you just want to hang on to it, or your kids are in college and you're not going to buy a new one until they get done with college, and you have to keep that car running. Every time you touch something behind it's broken or gonna break. And that's the way it's been on the ferry right along. You can fix the thing that broke, but a lot of times you'll come across something that's just awful behind it, so.
Was the Chautauqua Lake Historic Vessels Corporation, was that part of the Sea Lion operation?
It's a DBA for the Sea Lion, and at that point, they owned a lot of vessels. They owned they owned a lot of vessels. They owned the Griffin, which was a yacht. Mm-hmm. They had a couple of other smaller vessels. They had the steamboat eventually. What more?
Herself.
Herself?
Herself was the little one, the boat that went along beside the tender, or whatever you call it.
Alongside the Sea Lion.
Alongside the Sea Lion.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
there were a couple
the
others.
Sea Lion, which is Bernie Cowan's wonderful ship that he wanted built, and he wanted to build it just right, and he did. That's a lot of vessels to handle.
A lot of vessels.
And not much money coming in any place. So that was a strain. That was a real strain.
So in 2018, you have to kind of, through an inspection, pause and stop the use of the ferry. And this, we're going to get Jay involved here, and this is Jay Kuntz. And Jay, first of all, a little bit about you. I know that you're going to sing to us in a little bit because you had a great voice. I heard that. Didn't we hear that, Zach, earlier today, that he wanted to sing? You may do that at any point, but
I know 3 notes.
that's okay.
They're all low.
So get us involved. How you got involved in all of this?
I'm not a Chautauquan. I've been a visitor to Chautauqua Lake my entire life. My family history goes back a little ways to 1917 when my grandmother and grandfather came here. And since that time, Chautauqua has been a part of my family's history, and since I was born, part of my history. Our place that we have is on Watson Road, which is in Stow, between the ferry and the bridge. So the ferry is my neighbor. As I was approaching retirement, I retired 4 years ago, and as I was approaching retirement, thinking about the things that you want to do so that you don't just sit around, I wanted to pilot the ferry. It had been a part of my life. I'd listened to it, watched it all my life, and I got involved in 2016, got my license. I think that year I was able to do 1 run on my own. In 2017, had a number of runs with it, and then 2018 came along, and we had the failed inspection because of the hull. Well, you don't just get in for the fun part. You get in and you help wherever you can. And part of the problem that existed in 2018 was the year before. We had an independent contractor look at the ferry, and we unfortunately came under some feelings that everything was going to be all right because the inspector said things looked good. Well, they weren't. In 2018, we attacked many of the problems that the state wanted corrected. I think there are a total of 23 I-beams on the ferry that go from side to side. By the way, there's no port and starboard and no bow and stern, because since the ferry goes both directions, bow and stern change each time. It's kind of a unique thing about that boat. So port and starboard change, but there are these 23 beams, I think, that were 8 that needed either replaced or repaired. We took care of them. There were numerous leaks from the deck, the top deck, into the hold, and we attacked that. still failed inspection at the end of 18.
By the way, who's got jurisdiction over this? Is it Department of Transportation, New York State DOT?
It is, and I'm not going to get their name correct, but it is the Marine Services Department of the New York State Parks and Historic Organization.
Parks and Recreation.
Parks and Recreation. So it's not the DOT. It's Parks and Recreation Historic, and they have jurisdiction over all ferries in New York. New York does have 2 cable ferries, by the way. The other one is in Lake Ticonderoga,
Or someplace.
someplace like that. But anyhow, and the one thing that they want that we want, we're in total agreement on, is it needs to be safe. We cannot be putting people in cars on a boat that's not safe. In 2019, we had at it again, and although the hull, the problem is that the biggest problem is that the hull has deteriorated from rust. And it's not from the bottom, it's from the inside. Water has leaked from the deck down into the hull and rusted and thinned the metal to the point that the state wouldn't pass inspection. And in 2019, we did additional work. We sealed the deck. There's, as of yesterday, when I checked the hull compartments, they're dry. So we have solved the cause of the problem, but we still need to do some significant repairs on the hull. We're going to be doing a patch that's 8 foot by 13 foot. The state worked with one of the engineer designers to come up with a plan to fix this, and we're going to lift it out of the water, as one of the volunteers has called it, the big lift. And we're going to place it on the shore, and they're going to get underneath it and patch the hull. And we're very optimistically confident that once this big patch is done, that after the big lift and the repair, we're going to have the big splash.
I love it. You're a renowned photographer. So how does that skill set play into you becoming a sea captain?
Renowned photographer might be a stretch.
That's what she said.
I know which end of the camera to look through. During my career, I worked in video production as an independent freelancer. And everything's a problem, and you come in and you have to solve it. And a much smaller scale, much smaller scope. But when you look at a situation and you figure out what needs done, you just figure out how to get it done. I've always been persistent. I've acquired patience over the years. I wish I had the patience at 30 that I did now. And you just look at it, and a lot of it is just asking the right questions and listening to people, what they need to get the job done, how to go about it. I don't know how to weld. I know how to try and get the weld. When the welders tell me what they need and things like that, you just take it from there. So it's persistence, patience, and listening, and get the job done.
So you're the foreman, sounds like you're the foreman of this, quarterback, let's put the term. And as the quarterback, how do you even attack it? So in 2018, it fails inspection. The Parks and Recreation engineers, whoever the inspectors are, give you a punch list of items that need to be corrected in order for you to get that all-important license.
Well, 2018 was a big disappointment. At that point, I was a grinder. I wasn't qualified to really do much anything else other than operate a grinder. It was a big disappointment, not only for the failure, but the fact that we lost John. And even though I didn't get to know John very well, respect is something that just oozed when you did meet him. I realized that because I was retired, I did not have any commitments beyond those that I chose. I said, I'm going to do what I can to try and move the ball a little bit forward every time. And I just saw what we had done, saw what we needed done, asked the questions about how do we get this done, and tried to help those that were doing the work get what they needed to do the job. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get there. But again, cautiously optimistic that the big splash is going to happen, and we'll be doing what the ferry does best, which is going from Stow to Bemus. By the way, I do want to just make one point of correction. You called it the Stow Ferry. It really is the Bemus Point Stow Ferry, and even though I live in Stow and it's moored in Stow, the historical name is the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. So there's some things you don't try and change.
No question, and that's how the book says it. That's how the Ray says it. Everybody says it except me. So correct me, please. Are you going to videotape this? This is the big splash. That's a big thing.
No. When I retired, I've watched a lot of people over the years in all aspects of life and learn what people do good, what they do bad, what applies to me. When I retired from video, I closed the door. I picked up the still camera. So there will be a number of photographs of the big lift and the big splash. But as far as video, that was a life and a career that I loved. But I've put that all behind me.
Yeah, videographers are strange people.
Thank you.
Yeah. Chris, at some point, you are given a punch list after Jay tries to negotiate with the Parks and Recreation to get this punch list, hands it to you and says, now we got to fund it. What's the game plan? How does that work?
I didn't have a game plan. I'd never done it before. But I said I could, because I almost always say I can.
Yeah.
And it worked. And we ultimately raised, I think, about $86,000 total overall. The nice thing is that it was, I sound like Sanders, it's a bunch of little people giving little bits, mostly. And that's the beauty of it, is so many people want to help us out. And even as we were working the last few years, 2017, 2016, occasionally there'd be some days that the ferry didn't run as well as it could, and everybody was right there, do you need some more money? Do you need something? And so it was not hard. It was a good beginner's fundraise, as it turns out. We have now gone for some grants, which I hope will go well, to help us, because this is a staggering amount of money now.
You're a tax exempt 501c3 entity, right?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're in good shape. We're in really good shape. We paid for everything we've done for the last 2 years. We're not behind the ball at all. We still have a contingency fund, but we need to do all the work this time. And then with a good maintenance program, the ferry should continue to run until our grandchildren can bring some kids on the ferry too, I hope.
There's a gentleman by the name of Hall, H-O-H. Excuse me. You want to talk about him?
Jay has had a lot of contact with him, I think.
Every now and then you stumble on, or people stumble into your life. As I understand it, his company, Hall Industrial, was involved in 2011 when they redid the landings in both Bemus and Stow. He has a place on Stockwell Lake, so he's connected here. And he saw what was going on and offered the services of his company at cost, and supplied the welders and the equipment to do what needed to be done, replacing the beams. We were able to do some of the more mundane things like painting the beams, doing the grinding and things like that, but it was Chris and John, two very nice welders that worked with him, that had done the work in 18 and 19, and he is the one who is going to be doing the work. I say he, his company, Whole Industrial Services, is going to be doing the work this spring. He is committed in a way that I don't think you often find. And one of the interesting things was, in talking to him, he said, our company, like many companies, we donate to, different organizations, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the American Cancer Society. He said, we write checks. He said, but this is a project where what we do can help your organization. So I think that he's really enjoying the fact that his company is able to provide the kind of services. And without him, I'm sure we would have found another way. But right now, he and his company and the people that are working with him, are really leading the way as far as the work that needs done.
There's an actual pulling up and out of the ferry. That's a crane job. Does he provide that as well?
Last I talked to him, he felt that the size of his cranes that his company owns was going to be able to do it. Whether it be one crane or two crane, beyond my scope of understanding. Let the riggers who do that kind of work, tell us what to do, which is basically stay out of their way, and let them do their job. And we'll see how it goes. The weight of the ferry, if I remember correctly, is 50 ton, and the reach and the swing play into that in math that they are intimate with. So let them figure it out, and I have all the confidence in the world that they'll do it.
I have a good story about this guy, David. He came down and presented what he was going to do for us to a whole table full of us. So when we were at the Lawson Boat Center in Bemus Point, and just hoping that he had the answer. He'd already done approximately $30,000 of marine welding for us, which is triple welding. It's much more complex than people have to be certified to do this particular type of welding. And he said, told us what we're going to do. We're going to pick it up, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to put it back down in the water, and everything will be okay. And we were all sitting there sort of, stunned for a lot of reasons. And he said, it's okay. He said, you know what I did last year? He said, the people that have the Maid of the Mist bought a whole bunch of, they had 2 aluminum boats made that are going to be electric. And he said, and the guy that was building them for him pooped out and didn't get them put together or went bankrupt or something. And he said, so I had all these slices of bread, I had to put them together for this guy. And the guy said, well, have you ever done any marine work? And he said, well, yeah. He said, I've worked on the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. And that's not the end of it. So he finishes it up and he said, well, I just want to reassure you. He said, I have built 2 boats for the Maid of the Mist. So we were supposed to feel better. The guy's amazing, really quite amazing. We're just so lucky to have him. He's really wants this to work. And obviously we do too.
So Betty Lou, you are the ferry godmother.
I acquired that title last summer.
Well, it's an honor. And you've been the treasurer for a long period of time, so you keep track of the economics of this whole thing.
Yes, I was treasurer for 12 years. Mm-hmm.
Let me dig in a little bit too about your husband, John. Incredibly well respected in the county. Again, so many friends, but this was sort of his last major passion.
Yes.
And as things were happening the last 10, 12 years, what was his sense of it all? Was he optimistic? Was he pessimistic yet dogged? Where was he thinking this is going? Because this is unique, obviously one of only 2 in New York State.
This, as I said, was his passion. He was terribly optimistic over it. Even if everybody else was down, we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how to do this, and we're going to do this. And we find the right people to do it, and we're doing it. Yes, it was actually, passion is a word you don't use very often, but I think that was his passion. That's what kept him going for a long time.
Before that, what kept John busy? I'm not sure certainly for the camera, what was kind of John's background and a little bit about his bio?
Well, John was a lot of things. He was a dairy farmer. We made maple syrup. We grew potatoes. He was a volunteer fireman. Lots of other things that I can't remember right now, but yes,
Is he active in politics?
sort of.
Yeah.
He was a town councilman for a few years, but discovered that he could get more done off the council than he could on. So we got off of that.
And you still want to run for the board, Zach? Yeah. Exactly. So with this passion and as he saw things progress, and getting involved, certainly after the county gave up on it and we're going to sell it for scrap, did he have difficulty engaging volunteers or getting folks in the community to sort of rally around? Because you do need a leader, but you got to have people who are willing to understand and buy into the message.
I don't think he had any trouble at all finding volunteers. He asked people and they were thrilled to death to help. And people came and asked him if they could help. And I guess that was just the way it was. Yeah.
So Chris, what drew you to this project? We didn't ask.
Well, I grew up here and I went away for a while, like everybody does, and moved back here. And one of the things that I love is sailing. I've been sailing since I was 6 or 7 years old, whatever boat was available to do it, just learning by the seat of your pants rather than reading a book or anything like that. But I spent a lot of time trying to make it through the Narrows without a motor, just the sailboat. And a lot of times, on purpose, I would kind of fluff the sails a little bit and say, oh, I can't stop, I can't get going. And then what I was trying to do is stop the ferry every time, because it really worked. I mean, I stopped it a lot of times. I'm going to have to drive that thing until I am decrepit in order to pay them back for all the times I tried to stop them. We used to...
Did you feel guilty at all? Was there no sense of guilt?
No, that's what we did. It's what we did. And we used to water ski around the Gadfly while she was giving tours. We would circle the Gadfly water skiing. I mean, we were just awful. But I've been.
Well, how did you get through this? Did you go to psychiatric?
No.
Did you go to Ralph Walton? Did you get any?
No, if I had known Ralph, I might have asked him a question. He probably would have said, that's good for you. It just seemed important to me when I got back. It's something that I used. It was my freedom when I was young. We weren't allowed to ride on the main road. I'm a mile away from it down the highway, so I had to go back in the country and then back, and I could come down the Stow Road and cross the main highway, holy crow, and go to another world. I could be on my bicycle. I could be in Bemus all day and no parents, nobody that knew me. I mean, it was absolute freedom. The ferry gives you, perfect freedom, I think. It was a wonderful thing for everybody. Most children wanted to be there, wanted to be on the ferry going back and forth, because it was something you could do without their parents, For a bicycle, it was 10 cents. It was just a wonderful thing. I interviewed a bunch of people to do this book, and this lady the most, because she had the most to say, which was nice. But a lot of people said they heard this one lady got on the ferry one time, and she was heading from Stow to Bemus Point, and she said, oh, how long are you allowed to stay on the island before you have to come back to the mainland? Because she had no idea where she was. I mean, another lady who went through there was so sure she was on Lake Erie and how dangerous it was going to be, and just crazy. And then we get the people whose GPSs have brought them across the ferry, and I can't put my car on that. Well, yeah, sure you can. You can put your car on that. Oh, no, I can't. No, I can't. No, I can't. Because it's so scary. But,
Or a semi.
Or a semi, yeah. There was a semi that when they were building the bridge that was way overloaded, that just about sank it. It was pretty close before they got it off.
You happen to be an age which I can identify with. So there was one event around 1980 something where they were going to have a tug the boat.
They had a tug of ferry.
Yeah, talk about that, because I remember videotaping that. I remember
it was some beer company, Miller's or somebody.
Genesee.
Was it Genesee? That's right.
Sorry,
said that whoever won the tug of war, and they were going to have 50 people on each side, and attach it to the bumpers of the ferry, and whoever could get the ferry to come over to their side won all the beer they could drink, or something like that. Okay.
I was rooting for Stowe, by the way.
Well, Stowe won the first year, actually, which was good. But it was dangerous. They broke some welds on the ferry, and it was really bad. And then when Stowe won, they wanted to change the name to the Stowe Bemus Point Ferry, and they ended up getting a proclamation. And for one day they could say it and say it and say it all as many times as they wanted to.
That's where I'm coming from.
So they did tug a ferry a second time the next year, I think '85 or something like that, and the rope broke, and I think they decided it was just too dangerous, too bad. It's not meant to be played with like that.
Well, what I recall, because I was there when the rope broke,
Yeah,
and the people who were on the Stowe side, I think it was one.
it was, yeah.
The lady who was at the tail end, they all piled on her. She got hurt.
She got hurt, yeah. She lived to tell the story, but yeah, it was not the right place to be.
So you were starting to tell a story again. Another one of those stories that Hart talked about. How somebody was flirting with the women while they were showcasing that they were the captain, and forgot to sort of put it in reverse when it was running. Do you want to tell that story?
You can. It's not that the ferry goes all so much fast. It's that it's so heavy that it has a lot of momentum. It takes a really long time. Well, some jerk in a sailboat comes in front of it, and it takes a long time for it to stop. And sometimes throwing it in reverse, you can't quite stop it when you think you can. Several football fields, maybe, but you can bounce it pretty good off the landings if you're not paying attention. And that's a really bad thing, because there's probably 25 or 30 people standing around, not expecting to bash, and then there's people getting in cars and all this other kind of stuff. So yeah, crashing it like that is a terrible thing to do.
Did you have a story, Jay, since you were a captain?
There are many stories since Ferry's been my neighbor for my entire life. But the one where I was captain that was most interesting, there was a gentleman who I struck up a conversation with. It was he and his wife in the car. And he got out and we started talking, and he knew as much about the lake and the area as I did. And I started talking to him some more about why he knew that. And he said, well, our family's come up here for, probably over 70 or 80 years. He said, as a matter of fact, he said, my dad was a real good fishing buddy with a guy that lived right over there. And he pointed to what the place that at the time my family stayed in. And this was the eldest son, a generation or so ahead of me, of my dad's best fishing buddy. And just because we were having a friendly conversation on the ferry, we reunited, and I told him stories, he told me stories, and he and I have traded some pictures of the family. But it just is. There's so many connections with the ferry and with families and with people. For some people, it's their first time ever on a boat, which for me, having spent all my summers as a kid on a lake. For someone who's a middle-aged or older, never been on a boat, it's one of my sayings is that when you go someplace you really haven't visited unless you've either been on the water or in the water, wherever you go. And I also wanted to just add something about John Cheney. I didn't get to know him well enough, but I've heard enough things about him. John is the perfect example of to get involved and change things, to be a part of things is important, because you have to do it. It doesn't matter whether you're from Pittsburgh and it's a large city or a smaller area like Chautauqua. It takes people to get things done, and you need to get involved. And that was a motivator for me, and has been reinforced when I've gotten involved with the people on the ferry. To get things done, it takes a little bit of effort, and people need to do it, otherwise you lose it. And I would really, really hate to see, Chautauqua County lose the ferry, because, it's only a few months shy of the age of the county. And it's important. It's part of what I call the liquid highways that existed back then. And I enjoy history. And I see the relevance to it. Getting from point A to point B is always going to be something. And keeping the ferry as a touchstone for a actual working example of how things used to be has tremendous value. So, I'm encouraged by John, I'm encouraged by the other volunteers, and looking forward to some more stories that can be told about the ferry.
So if somebody wanted to, listening to this, either today in person or this will be up on YouTube, you guys consented, you just didn't know that, but this is going up on YouTube.
Yeah, I said, yeah, it was okay.
Okay, yeah. So what would be your message to say, come forward, and who would they contact?
You know where we're at.
You.
We're right there in the Narrows, currently on the Stowe side, but we'll soon be back and forth. I don't know the address off the top of my head.
I do.
Chris can give you that. But come out, get involved. If you want to be a pilot, not a captain, a pilot. Captain is up here. Pilot is right here at my level. You have to take a test from the state, it's an enjoyable way to talk to people, to meet people, to share your love for this wonderful area.
Vince Horrigan, is he back there? Vince was telling me that he somehow has got is he a captain? Is he whatever? He wants a hat. He's got a hat anyways.
Well, yeah.
Vince, if I'm not mistaken, shortly after he retired as county executive, he got his license, I think, in 2017. To the best of my knowledge, Vince has not had a chance to run a shift yet.
Oh, he's juiced. I see him every day.
And it's that kind of enthusiasm, that keeps us going. So.
Well, I usually run Sunday nights, and Sunday nights are a wonderful time because everybody's had their big weekend and everybody's getting ready to go back home, and they're coming back for one more ride across the ferry because they even went out of their way to come back on the ferry before they got on the expressway. And they'll tell stories about their uncle that used to be here, or their great-grandfather who used to dance up in the casino ballroom, and so many stories of people coming back. And the thing that Betty Lou and John did, this bringing the 4th grade kids onto the ferry, and they put a tarp down because they got splinters the first year they did it. They had to put a tarp down after that. But anyway, they would sit them down, and John would tell them all about the ferry, and Betty Lou would tell them all about the ferry, and they'd wrap them up in some life jackets, until John would lift them up. He thought it was a handle, and you stopped him. But a lot of those kids would come back later in the summer. They'll bring their entire family, and you can see them giving the family the tour of all the stuff we talked about. And then they'll come up and they say, "I told my father he could ring the bell," because we always let them ring the bell before they get off the ferry. And they'll bring the father to bring them. He said, "I told my dad he could ring the bell if he asked." So it's a wonderful thing. I mean, these kids are gonna want to say that they've ridden the ferry, they drove the ferry, or whatever. They're just great emissaries for us,
Speaking of emissaries for the good of the whole, you are in the process of putting together a book entitled The Bemus Point Stow Ferry, a history by somebody named Chris Flanders. What prompted you to do this?
I'm a history person. I read a lot of history, and it means a lot to me. I've been working really hard physically and mentally to try to help the ferry, and it seemed like it needed more history done. I knew Art. I've known him since I was a child, and I asked his kids, I said, "Do you think that maybe I could look at some of his stuff? I would like to just continue the story." And they gave me his desk at the town building in Stowe. I was allowed to sit at it. All the stuff he ever touched was all sitting there right where he left it. And to be able to go through the archives like that was just an amazing thing. And it's turned out to be fun. I worked all winter on it. And last week I got a publisher, thanks to some people in Chautauqua who gave me a name. So it's going to be published this summer, later.
So, as the godmother of the Bemus Point Ferry,
You almost can't say that.
I tried. Bemus Point Stow Ferry. What's your vision? What's the I'm going to give you the kind of the almost final word on all of this. But as you look here today, you're in 2020. You're about ready to have the big lift, the big splash. What would you what do you envision 5 years from now?
I think that the top thing on my mind and the top thing on most of the people's mind right now is we're going to get this thing done, we're going to get it fixed, and it's going to run for a long, long time.
It's great. So Chris, you do have the final word because you're the one that wanted us to have the opportunity to showcase this today, and this is very exciting. And again, what's your 5-year plan?
5-year plan is that it's going to be well-run. More and more people are going to get a chance to ride on it. It should be in good shape with a good maintenance program. We're just so excited about getting her back where it belongs. There's a saying that I came across when I was writing the book. It said something about the ferry as being on the ferry is a place of stability in an era of chaos. And it is what it is. It's been the center of the county since the beginning. And we just want to keep it going. And we will. We definitely will.
And if somebody wanted to support it, and where can they send checks? Where can they get involved? Is there a website?
There's a GoFundMe site, Save the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. There is also a post office box that you could send it to. It's box 39 in Bemus Point. 339.
329.
339.
329.
I don't think so.
She's the treasurer.
Yeah.
And anyway, if you want to look at something, there are 2 Facebook sites. One of them is called Friends and Fans of the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. The other one's called the Historic Bemus Point Stow Ferry. We put updates all the time. We put pictures up there all the time. We advertise this on that, and we have also used that as a touchstone for people to be able to donate or help. I mean, people just wanted to come and help, physically help, too, as well as financially. So, and we've been really, really blessed. We've had so many people help us.
The North Harmony regular building is right there, nearby where the ferry is, right? And do people stop? Can they stop in there and sort of give them a name? Because that's an office which is there kind of nonstop.
Well, they could. They would get it to us. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. That's not a problem.
Art's daughter-in-law, Nancy, is, I don't know her official title.
She's town clerk, I think.
Town clerk?
Yeah. Yeah, she could take care of anything that you need,
Yeah.
and would get it to the right person.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of so many, because I was one of those folks who went back and forth, and often you weren't sure when you left Chautauqua Institution, where we were trying to get on the other side of the lake, whether or not you'd get there within a half an hour or so, because you had to go around the lake.
It's a long way around.
A long way around. I remember those days. And we're gracious that for so many years the Bemus Point Ferry has been there. And it takes incredible talent, and you folks have, all 3 of you, demonstrated it. And leaders beget an awful lot of followers, and it looks like you have a lot of following, and this will happen. There's no doubt about it.
I think so too. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank them all for sharing this.